As Suicide Prevention Awareness Month continues, New York is renewing its efforts to raise awareness and provide resources to those in need. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Solomon Syed in Albany. Now, as we said, September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And from lawmakers to policy advocates, even local emergency services, they're all trying to get assistance to those dealing with mental health struggles. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, suicide is now the third leading cause of death among young adults. It's the 12th leading cause of death overall in the United States. 79% of people who die by suicide are male. In one Capital Region county, they're proposing a training program for mental health first aid. The Albany County Legislature approving the Mind Your Health training program this week. Employees in county departments that directly interact with the public will receive that training. The goal is to identify somebody who may be dealing with a mental health issue, interact with a person in crisis, and then connect those in need with help as quickly as possible.
We realize that COVID has really exposed a lot of things that are, going on with people. In the same way which you get first aid training, you need mental health first aid training.
If we fall down and we hurt our ankle, we will very quickly go and look for a doctor. If we start feeling like we're sadder than usual or more anxious than usual, we wait and figure, we'll just take care of it ourselves, because that's the messaging most of us as adults have gotten. 988 is for mental health, it's for suicide prevention. And it's not just for the person who's in crisis. If you have a friend you're worried about, you can call 988 and ask them, how do I have a conversation with them? What do I do? I'm really worried about someone, and get some of those resources for you.
And we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Stephen Giordano, the Commissioner of the Albany County Department of Mental Health. Dr. Giordano, we really appreciate your time today. Talk about the Mind Your Health training program. It's certainly a new approach to dealing with a mental health crisis. How do you envision this working?
As far as I understand it, are you talking about the program that the county is considering?
Yes, that the county legislature is moving forward with.
Yes. Well, we've taken the approach that mental health first aid is very similar to physical health first aid, and the legislature has designed a plan to bring this kind of educational base understanding to mental health issues to the employees, and I think it's a brilliant plan. We all take care of one another only if we know what our colleagues and our family members and our friends are going through. So this is an attempt to educate and expand the knowledge of mental health issues.
Doctor, for some people watching right now, they might ask, why wasn't this happening already? Is the need for this greater now than in the past, or is this an understanding that this was always needed, or maybe a combination of those two?
I think it was a combination of both of those things. The movement towards what, for lack of a better term, is mental health first aid education has been growing over the recent years, and there's been trainings throughout the community to a variety of groups. I think that skill and that technology has grown, as has the need, and we've seen in the last couple of years, as a result of so many of the things that we've witnessed, not least of which was a global pandemic, that the mental health needs of our community and of our fellow citizens has pretty much grown.
Doctor, what kind of training might this entail? Because obviously it would be difficult for, the average individual to, have the training that would come with, being a full-time psychologist or psychiatrist. So what type of training might this drill down to get folks the help they need?
Yeah, well, I think the intent is not to bring overly technical information to the layperson. I think it is to a couple of things. One is to address the issue of stigma, which we all sometimes experience. People are reluctant to talk about their own mental health issues, and they're reluctant to talk to their loved ones, friends, and colleagues about theirs. This is trying to raise the baseline understanding of the fact that we all experience mental health concerns, and by bringing it into the forum of discourse, it kind of normalizes things a bit. So the training is not at all meant to be technical. It is a basic understanding of what some mental health concerns may look like, and how to direct people who are struggling to get the help that they need.
Doctor, do you envision this model becoming the standard for other counties and certain other municipalities and how to deal with these situations?
Well, I can't speak for the other municipalities or counties, but I will tell you that I think this idea I'm trained as a psychologist. I've been doing this for multiple decades. I think this is a brilliant idea. And I think the folks in Albany County will be, certainly the employees in Albany County will be much better off for it. I suspect it will catch the attention of other counties and municipalities, and we'll see if they follow our lead.
Doctor, moving beyond just this training and getting to the conversation about mental health struggles right now, more and more we are seeing this struggle hitting young people. COVID exacerbated it too. Obviously, suicide is a tragedy no matter how old somebody is, but it's so tough to see young people with so much of their life ahead of them struggling. How is the county working to address this?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're absolutely right. The suicide is a tragedy irrespective of age. And unfortunately, we see suicide across the age spectrum in Albany County. No small comfort, though, in the fact that our numbers have stayed steady over the last decade, and the numbers that we see in folks under the age of 24 is again one loss of a life is too many, but it is not the largest group of suicide that we see in the county. But to your point, there are some unique challenges and struggles that our youth have always faced, but certainly more in recent years. And the things that come to my mind are things like the isolation that resulted from what we all had to do around the pandemic, coupled with social media, which can be a blessing and a curse. And I think, we have to have special concern for our youth. I was thinking the other day, walking around with masks for so long to keep ourselves healthy, but young people, especially very young people, are growing up learning how to socially interact with masks on. That's very challenging to read facial expression, to understand emotion that's conveyed through facial expression. I think we've for many years we're going to be dealing with the consequences of the last few years in terms of impact on the mental health of the general population, but certainly the youth.
COVID certainly changing the calculus on mental health and the approach to it. We see it, of course, with what the county legislature has decided to do in terms of training and educating people. Dr. Stephen Giordano, we really appreciate your time today. Such an important topic. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Anytime.
Pleasure to have you. Well, if you or a loved one are struggling with your mental health, you can contact or text 988 anytime. All right, coming up, the state is pushing for several efforts to improve the environment and lead efforts to go green. With Climate Week coming up, we're going to be joined by the DEC Commissioner, Basil Seggos, for an update on their progress. Meanwhile, if you have a comment or story idea, let us know. You can email Empire State Weekly, or you could also find us on Twitter. And welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Solomon Syed in Albany. Well, the state's Department of Environmental Conservation expanding its efforts to monitor air pollution in the state. It comes as the department is taking applications for a key grant during Climate Week and beyond. The DEC extending the deadline for applying for the state's Air Monitoring Capacity Building Grant. Eligible organizations now have until October 12th to apply for funding to develop or strengthen programs that improve air quality. The grant's coming as part of New York's statewide air quality and greenhouse gas mobile monitoring initiative. to improve the air quality over 5 million impacted New Yorkers might face. And we're pleased to be joined once again by the DEC Commissioner, Basil Seggos. Commissioner, thanks for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. Climate Week starts on Monday, September 19th. Just explain the importance of what it means this year.
Well, listen, every week is important when it comes to climate, but Climate Week, New York City, is a really incredible moment where the world descends on New York City, UN General Assembly, as well as national leaders, local leaders, state leaders who are all focused on climate. And it's a chance for us to showcase what New York is up to. It also coordinate with federal partners, coordinate with other states, and most importantly, coordinate with and communicate to the public, right? That is what it all comes down to emphasize the importance of climate action, bring the message out to New Yorkers and folks around the country who are paying attention to this, and show people that we are working hard on solutions that ultimately will address this crisis.
How important is that to have collaboration, because it's the ecosystem, even ideologically speaking, what you're doing in New York is only so good if other states are kind of falling in line with that.
Well, I tell you, listen, earlier this summer, it looked like the states would be left to their own devices on this. 24 states are working together closely, and federal government had some hiccups because of Congress and the Supreme Court. We've seen about a 180 since then. President Biden, I was at the White House this week, for his celebration of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the biggest ever commitment from the federal government to climate action. That now takes what would have been a state-led issue, is now a nationwide effort to reduce emissions and ultimately bring jobs into this country for the benefit of all Americans. And really, these are going to be the green jobs of the future that will sustain us for decades to come.
Talk about the impact in New York, because when folks at home hear the Inflation Reduction Act, probably many of them watching right now is saying, I didn't know that it was even doing that was a component of this bill. So talk about the impact here in New York.
Right. Well, listen, I mean, everyone is concerned about the cost of climate action, how you make that transition to the jobs of the future. We all know that economy will be a booming economy once we can achieve it. We need to get to that point, and to have $370 billion of now federal money available to the states and municipalities to reduce those costs, to reduce the cost of that transition, make it more affordable, right? Inflation Reduction Act is partly for inflation, but also partly for climate action, is going to drive all of those bills down over time and really put the burden on the federal government to shoulder some of that load that the states would otherwise be doing.
How is New York positioned to make that transition to clean energy and being a real player in terms of the workforce for those clean energy jobs? Well,
listen, Solomon, I think we are a national leader on that. We've been working on this for years, right? We have the nation's most ambitious climate action law on the books, requires big cuts in emissions. We've been making record investments in green energy already, clean air efforts. We've got the nation's leading offshore wind program. Solar is booming in New York State. All of those jobs are now taking hold. And when it comes to competing for those new federal dollars, right, the $370 billion, all of that requires the showing a competent plan. And we have that plan. So New Yorkers should know that we're going to be really aggressive in pursuing those dollars, ultimately bringing all that into the state, whether it's for offshore wind, whether it's for zero-emission vehicles, tax credits, or for greening our buildings and making agriculture more sustainable. I mean, all of that now is now attainable because of the federal investment.
What do you say to those who say, Commissioner, this sounds great. We want to move towards clean. We want the environment to be in a better place, but we're just not there yet. The price points on this, it's just not affordable. We can't completely leave the fossil fuels behind. What do you say to those folks?
Well, I'll say, look, we are planning aggressively for this transition, knowing that if we don't do it, we are going to be jeopardizing the future of not just the state, but the country and the globe. This is a serious crisis that we're dealing with. We are not taking our eye off the ball about affordability and ultimately consumer impacts. That is front and center. Jobs, of course, being core to that. That's why this federal investment is so important, because it's going to reduce all of those costs. Solomon, there is no plan B on this. We have a limited window to get it right. Plan B is, we're building walls to keep the sea back and rescues to keep people from flooded basements. Our Plan A has to work. It has to work in conjunction with the federal government, with all of the municipalities in New York State, with all of the businesses in New York State, and of course all the consumers. And we're going to get it right.
Commissioner, speaking of keeping New York clean, can you give us an update on the Climate Action Council and the scoping and where you are with that right
Sure.
now?
Well, listen, we just had our 24th public meeting this week, and are getting close to finishing our plan by the end of this year. Mind you, it was last December we had the draft plan. Now the final plan is due at the end of this year, and that will guide the state's economy-wide investments in reducing emissions. It will then lead to, of course, new laws, new regulations, new public engagement. And we're going as quickly as possible, hitting all of our targets and making sure that we're incorporating as much feedback as possible from everyone that is concerned about the future. And that includes regular New Yorkers, but it also includes businesses, unions, and those that want to see this transition done right.
Commissioner, we'll close with where we started, Climate Action Week. You talked about being able to get the message out to folks and New York residents about the importance of it, the work that you're doing. What do you want them to take away from it at the end of this week? What are you hoping for?
Well, listen, I think that there are some exciting announcements coming. The New Yorkers should see that Governor Hochul is pushing hard to have this transition as beneficial as possible to all New Yorkers. So we'll have some exciting announcements, of course, that will help get the word out about all the work we're doing. And New Yorkers should get involved as often as possible. Please look for opportunities to weigh in with us so that we can do this together. Communication is going to be everything on this super challenging initiative.
Commissioner, always good to have you here on Empire State Weekly. Thanks for joining us.
Solomon, thank you. Good to be with you.
All right, earlier this week, the governor relinquishing some of her expanded authority under the COVID-19 state of emergency. Coming up, we have details on some oversight powers coming back to the state controller that was put on hold during the pandemic. Meanwhile, if you have a comment or story idea, please let us know. You can email Empire State Weekly. You can also find us on Twitter. And welcome back once again to Empire State Weekly. I'm Solomon Syed in Albany. The state controller's office has not been reviewing COVID-related state contracts during the pandemic because of the governor's emergency powers. Capitol correspondent Amel Taligi explaining what happens next now that those emergency powers have expired.
Normally, contracts have to be competitively bid on. When COVID hit, both former Governor Cuomo and Governor Hochul enacted emergency powers which allowed them to bypass the bidding process and purchase the supplies they needed to combat COVID as soon as possible.
The order not being renewed means that the comptroller can now review those contracts and make sure that the taxpayers are getting the best deal for what we need to do to fight the COVID pandemic going forward.
Rachel Foss is Senior Policy Advisor for reInvent Albany. She says the emergency powers suspended only touch on COVID. There are still other bids and contracts the comptroller's office is suspended from reviewing.
The gun violence emergency order that is still in effect also suspends the comptroller's procurement authorities. There's a bill that we would like the governor to sign that would restore the comptroller's powers over SUNY contracts, for example.
Foss says the comptroller's office also ensures there's no concerns of corruption or pay to play happening within those contracts.
We don't want to see a company being moved to the front of the line to get a contract where maybe they gave contributions to the governor for the campaign. We want to see a fair process for all contracts in terms of bidding.
I also reached out to the state's comptroller's office. In a statement, they say the decision to continue the executive order lies with the executive and the legislature. We stand ready to resume our oversight role. Reporting in Albany, Amel Taligi.
Well, curriculums could be changing for many students in New York. The Board of Regents approving a new rule that would require students in non-public schools to have substantially equivalent instruction as those in public school. The new rule does not regulate religious instruction. The rule is set to take effect in 2 weeks, with schools facing a review by the end of the 2024-2025 school year.
They are not saying that we cannot teach our religious studies, but they are saying that in terms of the amount of time budgeted for children, we're talking about kids, right? The amount of time budgeted for children that are in school, you're obligated to use X amount of time for whatever we have, and what's left over, you can use it for religious studies.
All right, stick around. We're back with a look at the week ahead in just a moment. Meanwhile, if you have a comment or story idea, let us know. You can email Empire State Weekly. You can also find us on Twitter. And finally, here on Empire State Weekly, we are continuing to follow the latest developments as the state prepares for legal marijuana sales. Farms in New York already receiving their licenses to grow cannabis conditionally, but the sale of that product is now in question. We're going to check in on where things stand as the September deadline to apply for a cannabis retail dispensary license gets closer. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I am Solomon Syed in Albany. We will see you again next week. Don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's the full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across New York.